Hello and welcome to Talking Books. I'm Jill de Villiers. My guest today became a familiar face on our TV screens when she was a senior anchor at eNCA for over a decade. She is Iman Rappetti, and she is here to talk to us about her book, Becoming Iman, an adventure through rebellion, religion and reason. Welcome, Iman. Thanks so much for coming in.
Jill, it's so nice to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
It's great. I've been looking forward to this.
I'm so happy for the invitation. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this. We're going to have fun.
Well, reading your book, it's very much about identity, various types of identity, and I think a lot of us struggle with that. So we start with the question of identity. Who am I? Where do I come from? And we normally start in our childhood, and we build it up until we start asking the more metaphysical questions of, why am I here? What is my purpose on this earth? And this is the journey that you take on this in the book. Tell me about your early days before you became Iman.
You know, when you ask these questions about identity, I mean, my mother's voice is immediately in my ear. What is this? Who am I? Where am I stuff, you know? Because in her sort of age group, in her generation, these were luxurious questions to ask. Women like her had to get up and go. They had to make sure they kept the home fires burning. So she was kind of my first educator into who I was as a young girl and as a woman in society. And I think I got a lot of my sense of pragmatism, my sense of emotional efficiency and elasticity from my mother, because she had to learn to be all kinds of women. And I think when you grow up, especially in a poorer community, you grow up with people who are struggling, you grow up looking at people who've managed to leave the neighborhood or the hood where you grew up. You kind of straddled in between these very different worlds, constantly asking, well, where do I fit in? Where's my place? Am I going to be able to aspire? And that to me is one of the most important things I think about growing up where we grow up, does it create a context where you can dream?
And for you as well, with a coloured mother and an Indian father, that caused quite a bit of havoc in your life.
It's amazing how, like in South African society, Jill, when we talk about a race, I mean, it's so dichotomized, it's black and white. And yet in between that range are so many other different types of people. You get the so-called colored or mixed race people, depending on how people want to identify. You have the Indian community. And when you grow up in the middle of those two communities, you always have the sense of not belonging in either of those places 100%. So you're constantly either trying to shapeshift, to show yourself worthy or approved. You almost feel like an imposter. I think that's where this notion of an imposter syndrome comes in from very early on. I'm so glad that I grew up and I matured, and I think I'm at a place where I'm more at peace with who I am right now, and I'm pretty self-confident, and I think pretty self-actualized for now.
Can you pinpoint it to a moment when you realized that you were strong enough to be yourself?
It's always part of a continuum, isn't it? Like every experience that you have shapes you, whether these are happy experiences or tragic experiences. So when you lose your father at a young age, somebody who is almost like, the axis of your life, you have to redefine what your strength is predicated on. Or when you have to move environments and find a new belonging in a new space when we moved. Again, you have to kind of define yourself differently. Our lives are punctuated constantly by those moments which demand of us to do kind of self-critique and then to see whether we rise or fall to the occasion. In my case, I'm grateful that in the main, I've managed to rise rather than fall.
You have a chapter in your book, the relationship you had with your father is a bittersweet relationship. You talk about the wounding years where the experience wasn't that great. And then you still continued to love your father, and this is where Christianity stepped in. So if you can cover that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we don't get to choose who our parents are. We don't have a say in their pathology and what kinds of demons they will bring into a father-daughter relationship or into a husband and wife relationship. My father certainly brought his demons into his relationship with my mom when he was very little. And as I write in the book, painfully so. I mean, there were moments of domestic violence where I was caught up in the middle, or I would find my mother on the side of the bed, covered in blood and so on. And these are things that really shake you as a young person. And at the same time, do you have the capacity as a very small child to question, well, should I love the person? Should I love my father? Can I love my mother? And it was very, very, very difficult. I think if he hadn't had that evangelical moment through someone coming into their lives and showing them religion, which would, put them onto a different path and would see him I think, exorcised a lot of his own personal demons, maybe I wouldn't have loved him as much as I continue to love him in my later life. So I think those are important things to bear in mind in how we shape and love the people that we are with, even when they are less than ideal versions of themselves.
So Christianity became a kind of savior to you at that early age.
Yeah, I loved being a Christian. Oh, Joel, I was in the choir. You know, it's the happy clappy church, and it's all spirit filled, and I really loved it. And I think being in the church taught me a lot about how to be free. Of course, you know, you evolve constantly, and you subject your belief system to new things and new realizations. And so I kind of evolved out of Christianity into Islam, out of Islam and into this nowhere land where I am right now.
So before we go to the nowhere land, let's talk about Islam. And what was it that attracted you about the religion?
Well, first of all, I don't know if you've ever heard, do you know what Qiraat is? Qiraat is the recitation of the Quran in Arabic, and it is one of the most poignant and provocative sounds you'll ever, well, in my experience, that you will ever hear. It is so beautiful and so philosophically rich. And of course, I came to encounter Qiraat after I knew what the basic philosophy and meaning of Islam was. And it really appealed to me, this kind of return to nature, this return to the natural, this being seized with prayer 5 times or more a day, having all of these rituals. I mean, it really, really appealed to me. I needed the kind of religious discipline that it offered. And soon, like with most things, when environmentally it becomes difficult to live inside, a shape that perhaps doesn't quite fit you as a human, and how you perhaps see yourself even as a woman in terms of your own aspirations, I knew that the writing was on the wall and I had to move on.
So Islam has a poetry about it, a depth about it that appeals to your soul, and yet there can be such contradictions in it in terms of how your life is supposed to be lived.
But I call it in my world, and again, you know, there are whole groups of people who will defend different aspects that I might find unpalatable, that they will be able to defend and justify that. And so I see this and I write about it purely from my own personal experience in the most sincere way, because I did seek to understand. And I don't think that if you're flirting with religion, you could stay for a 10-year period, which is how long approximately I was Muslim. But philosophically, the appeal was one thing, and practically, the reality was something else. And I found, you know, as you'll read in the book, certain aspects that for me were unpalatable. In terms of my study and the respect for my scholarship that would come after many, many years, the kind of universal respect wasn't there for my ability to be a scholar as a woman.
Because you wanted to be able to teach, and then you found out that all of the knowledge that you gained would be for yourself only.
It was more than teaching. It was about being an Islamic jurisprudent as a female, which is a little bit more severe, because you're allowed to make judgments and issue fatwas or rulings based on your legal and jurisprudential understanding. So I knew that I would spend 7, 10 or more years in scholarship, and at the end of that, my understanding was, as it was explained by my teacher, would be that I would only be able to make a following of myself, that I would be able to make religious edicts and judgments, but they would apply only to myself. And that to me was, if my brain and my ability to reason is good enough for me, well, why can't it be good enough for everyone else in society? And I think this is an ongoing kind of debate and challenge that Islamic scholars and women scholars in particular might still be grappling with.
And how did you become a journalist?
So I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. I just knew that whatever I was going to be doing in my life had to have something to do with being socially conscious, being an activist. And you'll hear me say in many different platforms, this notion of people being voiceless is, for me, completely fallacious. People have a voice. It is our responsibility as journalists to make their voices louder, to put more of a spotlight on what's happening where they live, and to allow them to tell their stories, not for us as journalists to put a filter and to interpret them in the way that we see. So, those attributes were always there. And, when I realized they were offering journalism as a course of study, I was like, that's it, that's what I want to be. And of course, we couldn't afford the tuition for law, because I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. Money was always a challenge, so I found myself at a Technicon a year later than I expected, studying journalism, and I've never looked back. I think as journalists we still reevaluate whether what we're doing has meaning, and I think that's a good place to be in. We continually interrogate ourselves.
And you change as well in your life as a journalist. You go little paths this way and that. You moved from television into radio.
So I did current affairs in Iran at the public broadcaster. I did a current affairs show there. I came to South Africa, I did online media, digital media at the SABC. Then I found myself a business day working in newspapers, 702 radio, ETV, for a long stint doing television. And now I'm back with I would say my first love, which is radio. And did you know I'm a published author now, Jill?
Indeed.
And that's been so fun for me, you know, because you don't have to be just the one thing. And that's what's been so delicious for me, is that we define ourselves very rigorously in one way or the other, when actually we can be anything we damn desire.
Do you think you'll write another book?
Well, let's see how the sales go with this one. So far it's doing well. But beyond the sales, I mean, I think it's more how people relate to the book and what it allows them to echo in themselves that's been exciting for me. And I think that maybe the bug has bitten slightly. So I'd love to bugger off on a retreat somewhere and write books. I'm an aspiring poet. And I think maybe, if the world allows me, my next book is going to be a fiction.
There is a poem in the book which is quite moving, which is about a boy in Iran. I suppose we can't really read the poem now, but
I know it off by heart,
okay,
so I can
please,
read some extracts. It was written, you know, at me encountering Iranian life and the concept of martyrdom in Shia Islam, which is practiced in Iran, is incredibly honorable and incredibly high. And in fact, my son is named after this young man who was 13 years old at the time, who was considered to be a martyr, and his act of martyrdom was said, you know, to have brought the Iran-Iraq war, which had been raging for 8 years, to an end. And I was trying to put myself into the mind of somebody who was going to be a martyr, and his family at that time. Some of the views, of course, I've evolved out of, so I don't hold them anymore. But the opening line goes something like, "Little boy, not yet a man, the earth for a bed, for a blanket, a tank. In his hand a grenade, his little heart unafraid. Muhammad Hussein will never forget your name." But as I say, when I read that now, and I realize how radical I was at the time, there's such a difference in my worldview and my perspective now. And that whole poem, I think, has to really seriously be read in the context of a particular mindset at a particular time.
Because then you were actually prepared to die for what you believed in.
I was. If I'd been asked to, I would have. And I think what the appeal is in that chapter of the book is that there are lots of things about the world and about whole demographics of people that we do not understand. And I think, while you might not condone negative behavior, but if you seek to understand, the world will be, I think, a better and a less violent place.
Iman, this time has just flown. We're at the end of our interview, so thank you so very much for coming in and sharing your thoughts with us. And I wish you everything of the best with your next fiction.
Thank you, Jill. It's been a pleasure.
And my guest is Iman Rappetti, and her book is Becoming Iman, an adventure through rebellion, religion, and reason. And that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.